There's a sentence that confuses people more than almost anything else in relationships. I love you, but we shouldn't be together. To the average person, that sounds irrational. It sounds manipulative. It sounds like a contradiction. Because most people believe love naturally creates closeness. They believe if someone truly loves you, they move toward you, not away from you. But avoidant attachment doesn't operate according to normal emotional logic. And this is where people make a massive mistake. They interpret avoidant behavior through the lens of secure attachment. That's why they keep asking questions like, if they loved me, why did they leave? If they cared, why did they become cold? Why would someone push away the exact person they say they want? Because for avoidance, intimacy does not only trigger affection, it also triggers threat. And once you understand that, their behavior starts making disturbing amounts of sense. See, avoidants usually learned very early in life that emotional dependency comes with pain. Maybe emotions were dismissed. Maybe vulnerability was punished. Maybe closeness felt inconsistent, controlling, or overwhelming. So they adapted, not consciously. Nervous system level adaptation. They became self-contained, independent, emotionally armored. And over time, distance stopped feeling lonely. It started feeling safe. Now here's the dangerous part. Avoidants still crave connection like everyone else. They still want love. They still fantasize about deep intimacy. But when intimacy becomes real, not imagined, not controlled, not distant, their nervous system starts interpreting emotional closeness as loss of control. That's why the closer the relationship gets, the more internal pressure they feel. At first, they can look incredibly connected, passionate, attentive, vulnerable even. But eventually, emotional expectations increase. The relationship becomes real, and now their subconscious survival system activates. Not because you're toxic, not because you failed, but because intimacy itself becomes emotionally dysregulating. This is why avoidants often experience two opposite emotional realities simultaneously. One part of them genuinely loves you. Another part feels trapped by the emotional intensity of needing someone. And those two systems begin fighting each other internally. That's why they say things that sound emotionally insane to securely attached people. I've never felt this way about anyone, but I need space. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, but this relationship is too much. I love you, but we shouldn't be together. Those statements are usually not calculated lies. They are emotional collisions. The avoidant nervous system is trying to solve two competing problems at once. How do I keep connection? And how do I escape emotional vulnerability? Most people think avoidants leave because they don't feel enough. In reality, many leave because they feel too much. That's the paradox nobody talks about. Deep love creates deep exposure, and exposure activates fear. Now understand something critical here. Avoidants are not emotionless. They are emotionally defensive. Huge difference. Many of them suppress emotions so automatically that even they don't fully recognize what they feel until distance occurs. That's why some avoidants appear cold during the breakup, then emotionally collapse weeks or months later. Distance regulates them. Closeness dysregulates them. So after separation, their nervous system calms down enough. H for buried attachment emotions to finally surface. And meanwhile, the partner is sitting there completely destroyed, trying to understand how someone can say, I love you, while simultaneously abandoning the relationship. Because to securely attached people, love means movement toward. To avoidance, love can feel like movement toward danger. Now, here's where this becomes destructive. Avoidants often mistake emotional deactivation for clarity. When they pull away and finally feel relief, they assume, see, this relationship was the problem. But what actually disappeared wasn't necessarily love, it was nervous system pressure. And if they never recognize that distinction, they repeat the cycle forever. New person, new chemistry, new excitement. Then intimacy deepens, fear activates, withdrawal begins. Over and over again. And the tragedy is this. Many avoidants don't lose relationships because they lack love. They lose relationships because they lack emotional tolerance for sustained vulnerability. That's an entirely different problem. Now, does this excuse harmful behavior? Number. Understanding psychology does not erase accountability. Mixed signals damage P. Apple. Emotional inconsistency damages people. Being loved by an avoidant can sometimes feel like standing near someone who desperately wants warmth while simultaneously fearing fire. And if the avoidant never becomes self-aware, They unintentionally create cycles of hope, confusion, closeness, distance, reconnection, and emotional exhaustion. But there's another side people rarely discuss. Sometimes avoidants genuinely believe leaving is an act of protection. They think, "You deserve better. I'll only hurt you. I can't give you what you need." And beneath that statement is often hidden shame. Not superiority. Shame. Because many avoidants secretly feel defective in intimacy. They can function in careers, goals, independence, logic, performance, but emotional dependence feels terrifying because it activates unresolved wounds they spent years trying to outrun. So when they say, "I love you, but we shouldn't be together," what they may really mean is, "I love you, but I don't know how to stay emotionally safe while loving someone deeply." That's the real translation. And this is important for everyone listening. Love is not the only ingredient required for a healthy relationship. Emotional capacity matters. Self-awareness matters. Communication matters. The ability to remain present during vulnerability matters, because love without emotional security often becomes emotional chaos. And the hardest truth of all, you cannot love someone out of an attachment wound they refuse to confront themselves. No amount of reassurance can permanently calm a nervous system committed to emotional escape. The avoidant has to recognize the pattern. They have to stop romanticizing distance as freedom. They have to understand that intimacy is not imprisonment. And until that happens, they may continue losing people they genuinely care about while convincing themselves the relationship itself was the danger. When in reality, the danger was emotional closeness exposing unresolved fear. Avoidants often live with a painful contradiction inside them. They crave love deeply, yet at the exact moment love becomes emotionally real, their nervous system begins to experience danger. To most people, love feels comforting, grounding, and safe. But for avoidants, intimacy can unconsciously trigger feelings of pressure, vulnerability, loss of control, or even an emotional suffocation. This is why they may move towards someone passionately in the beginning, then suddenly become distant once the relationship deepens. It is not always because their feelings disappeared. In many cases, the feelings became too intense for them to emotionally regulate. The deeper the connection becomes, the more exposed they feel. Emotional closeness requires openness, dependency, consistency, and vulnerability, all things that can activate unresolved fears from earlier experiences in life. Many avoidants learned, consciously or unconsciously, that relying on others eventually leads to disappointment, rejection, criticism, or emotional pain. As a result, they built emotional independence as a survival strategy. Over time, self-protection became more familiar than connection itself. This creates an internal battle. One part of them genuinely wants intimacy, affection, and emotional safety with another person. Another part immediately fears what that closeness could cost them. They may fear losing freedom, being emotionally consumed, becoming responsible for another person's feelings, or eventually getting hurt. So even while they are falling in love, their conscious mind is preparing an escape route. That is why avoidants often send mixed signals. They may express deep affection one day and emotional distance the next. They can say, "I love you" sincerely while simultaneously pulling away from the relationship. To the other person, this feels confusing and painful because the behavior contradicts the words. But inside the avoidant, both emotions are real at the same time. The desire for connection and the fear of emotional exposure. In many cases, avoidants do not even fully understand their own reactions. They simply feel overwhelmed and interpret that discomfort as proof that something is wrong with the relationship. What they are actually experiencing is the nervous system responding to intimacy as if it were a threat. Until they become aware of this pattern, they may continue sabotaging meaningful relationships, not because they are incapable of love, but because love itself activates fears they never learned how to safely handle. One of the biggest misunderstandings about avoidance is the belief that they are always dishonest when they express love. People often assume that if an avoidant leaves, becomes distant, or avoids commitment, then every emotional word they spoke must have been fake. But human psychology is rarely that simple. Many avoidants genuinely love the people they pull away from. The contradiction is not always rooted in manipulation or deception. More often, it comes from fear overpowering emotional security. When an avoidant says "I love you," those feelings can be completely real in that moment. They may deeply admire the person, feel emotionally attached, think about them constantly, and even imagine a future together. The problem begins when emotional intimacy starts becoming permanent, intense, or emotionally demanding. Love itself is not always the issue. The vulnerability that comes with love is what creates internal panic. For avoidants, love can trigger a subconscious alarm system. The closer they become to someone, the more emotionally exposed they feel. They may begin worrying about losing independence, disappointing their partner, becoming emotionally dependent, or eventually being abandoned themselves. Even healthy intimacy can feel psychologically overwhelming because it activates fears they learned long before the relationship ever existed. This is why avoidants often behave in ways that seem emotionally contradictory. They can cry over someone, miss them deeply, and still withdraw from the relationship. They may say "I love you" sincerely while simultaneously needing distance. To securely attach people, this makes no logical sense because love is associated with stability and closeness. But avoidants experience love through a nervous system that often links intimacy with emotional danger. Many avoidants also struggle to fully process or express emotions in real time. They may suppress vulnerability automatically because emotional dependence feels unsafe. As a result, they can appear calm or detached externally while experiencing intense emotional conflict internally. Sometimes they only realize the depth of their feelings after separation creates enough emotional distance for them to feel safe again. This does not mean every avoidant is emotionally healthy or incapable of hurting others. Fear-driven behavior can still cause confusion, mixed signals, and emotional pain. But it is important to understand that emotional inconsistency does not automatically mean the love was fake. In many cases, the feelings were genuine, but the person lacked the emotional tools to sustain intimacy without becoming overwhelmed by fear. The tragedy is that avoidants often lose relationships they truly value because their protective instincts become stronger than their ability to remain emotionally present. They are not always running away from the person. Sometimes they are running from the vulnerability that genuine love forces them to confront within themselves. For many avoidants, emotional distance is not simply a preference, it becomes a survival strategy deeply wired into their nervous system. What looks cold, confusing, or uncaring from the outside is often an automatic form of emotional self-protection happening beneath conscious awareness. When intimacy becomes too emotionally intense, the avoidant mind and body begin searching for relief, and distance becomes the fastest way to regain a sense of internal control. This is important to understand because people often personalize an avoidance withdrawal. They assume the distance must mean they were not attractive enough, loving enough, or important enough. But in many cases, the avoidant is not reacting primarily to the partner. They are reacting to what emotional closeness activates inside themselves. The relationship becomes emotionally overwhelming not necessarily because it is unhealthy, but because intimacy forces them into levels of vulnerability their nervous system has never learned to comfortably tolerate. Many avoidants grew up learning that emotions were unsafe, burdensome, or unreliable. They may have experienced caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, critical, intrusive, or dismissive. Over time, they adapted by depending on themselves rather than relying emotionally on others. Independence became more than a personality trait, it became emotional armor. They learned to regulate stress through self-containment, emotional suppression, and psychological distance. As adults, this conditioning follows them into romantic relationships. At first, connection may feel exciting because the emotional stakes are still low. But as attachment deepens, something changes internally. The more emotionally important the relationship becomes, the more vulnerable they feel to disappointment, rejection, obligation, or loss of freedom. Their nervous system begins interpreting closeness as pressure instead of safety. This is why avoidants often start creating distance right when relationships become more emotionally meaningful. They may suddenly need excessive space, become emotionally unavailable, focus heavily on work or distractions, avoid serious conversations, or emotionally shut down after moments of intimacy. To the partner, the behavior feels abrupt and confusing. But internally, the avoidant often experiences it as an attempt to stabilize overwhelming emotions. Distance temporarily calms their nervous system. It reduces the emotional intensity that intimacy creates. In that space, they regain the feeling of autonomy and emotional control they associate with safety. Unfortunately, this relief can become psychologically reinforcing. The avoidant begins unconsciously believing that closeness causes distress while distance creates peace. As a result, they repeatedly withdraw whenever emotional vulnerability increases. The painful reality is that this pattern often damages the very relationships they care about most. Pulling away may protect them from temporary emotional discomfort, but it also prevents the deeper trust and security they secretly long for. Until they recognize that distance is a defense mechanism rather than true emotional freedom, they may continue confusing emotional avoidance with self-preservation, even while losing meaningful connection in the process. Many avoidants unknowingly confuse emotional calm with emotional disconnection because their nervous system was shaped in environments where true intimacy did not feel safe or familiar. As a result, relationships that are healthy, stable, and emotionally available can feel strangely uncomfortable to them, while distance, unpredictability, or emotional chaos may feel more natural. What most people experience as safety, avoidance may experience as vulnerability, and what they experience as relief is often emotional detachment rather than genuine peace. This confusion usually begins early in life. If someone grows up in an emotionally inconsistent environment, they adapt to survive it. They may learn that closeness comes with criticism, pressure, rejection, emotional overwhelm, or disappointment. Instead of associating love with comfort and security, they begin associating it with stress and emotional exposure. Over time, emotional self-protection becomes automatic. Their nervous system learns that the safest position on is emotional distance. Because of this conditioning, healthy intimacy can feel deeply unfamiliar. A stable partner who communicates openly, expresses consistent affection, and wants emotional closeness may unintentionally trigger anxiety inside the avoidant. The relationship itself may be completely healthy, but the emotional availability feels overwhelming because it requires vulnerability, dependence, and sustained emotional presence. The avoidant nervous system interprets this openness as risky, even when no actual danger exists. This is why many avoidants start feeling uncomfortable precisely when a relationship becomes calm and secure. In the beginning, excitement and uncertainty can create emotional stimulation without demanding deep vulnerability. But once the relationship settles into genuine intimacy, the avoidant may suddenly feel restless, trapped, emotionally numb, or disconnected. They may mistake this discomfort as proof that something is missing in the relationship, when in reality they are simply confronting emotional safety that feels unfamiliar to them. Ironically, some avoidants feel more emotionally activated in relationships filled with distance, inconsistency, tension, or emotional uncertainty. Chaos can feel familiar because it matches the emotional patterns their nervous system learned in the past. Healthy love may feel boring not because it lacks meaning, but because their mind is conditioned to associate emotional intensity with love and emotional calm with disconnection. This creates a painful cycle. When a relationship becomes emotionally safe, the avoidant unconsciously pulls away to recreate emotional distance and regain a sense of control. They may start focusing on flaws in the partner, fantasizing about escape, withdrawing emotionally, or convincing themselves they have lost feelings. In reality, what they often lose is emotional stimulation, not genuine connection. The tragedy is that avoidants may walk away from healthy relationships believing they are following clarity, when they are actually following familiarity. They confuse the absence of emotional chaos with the absence of love because their nervous system has not yet learned that true intimacy is supposed to feel calm, stable, and emotionally safe rather than constantly uncertain or emotionally distant. One of the most emotionally confusing aspects of being involved with an avoidant is the constant cycle of closeness and distance. Their internal conflict often creates mixed signals that leave partners feeling emotionally unstable, uncertain, and exhausted. One moment the avoidant seems deeply connected, affectionate, vulnerable, and emotionally invested. The next moment they become distant, cold, overwhelmed, or unreachable. This cycle repeats so often that the relationship can begin to feel emotionally disorienting. The reason this happens is because avoidants are usually fighting two powerful emotional forces at the same time. Part of them genuinely wants intimacy, love, and connection. They enjoy feeling understood, valued, and emotionally close to someone. but another part of them fears what that closeness represents. Intimacy activates vulnerability, emotional dependency, and the possibility of pain. As soon as the relationship starts feeling emotionally important, fear begins competing with affection. This creates a push-and-pull dynamic. When distance exists, the avoidant often misses the connection and starts moving closer again. They may become loving, attentive, emotionally expressive, and deeply engaged. During these moments, his feelings can be sincere and intense. The partner feels hopeful because it seems like the relationship is finally becoming secure and emotionally stable. But as intimacy deepens, the avoidant's nervous system begins interpreting the emotional closeness as pressure. They may start feeling trapped, overwhelmed, emotionally exposed, or afraid of losing independence. Instead of understanding these feelings as attachment fear, they often unconsciously assume something must be wrong with the relationship itself. To relieve the discomfort, they pull away emotionally or physically. This withdrawal shocks the partner because it seems disconnected from what was happening only days earlier. The avoidant may suddenly need space, avoid serious conversations, become emotionally unavailable, or act indifferent after moments of deep closeness. The partner is left trying to understand how someone can appear so loving and distant almost simultaneously. What makes this cycle especially painful is the inconsistency. Human beings emotionally bond through predictability, safety, and trust. Mixed signals disrupt that sense of emotional security. The partner begins constantly analyzing behavior, arcing for reassurance, and trying to prevent the next withdrawal. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion because the relationship starts revolving around instability rather than connection. Meanwhile, the avoidant is often confused too. They may genuinely miss the relationship while creating distance from it. They can love someone deeply and still feel an overwhelming urge to escape when intimacy becomes emotionally intense. Without self-awareness, they keep repeating the same cycle. Moving closer when they feel lonely, panicking when they feel vulnerable, withdrawing to regain control, then returning once distance creates emotional relief. The tragedy is that both people often suffer. The partner feels emotionally drained and insecure, while the avoidant remains trapped in a cycle where fear repeatedly sabotages the very connection they secretly long for most. Many people believe that love is powerful enough to heal almost anything. They assume that if someone is loved deeply, patiently, and consistently enough, their fears will eventually disappear. But attachment wounds do not heal through love alone. Real love can provide support, safety, and opportunity for growth. Without self-awareness and emotional work, unresolved fears often continue sabotaging even the healthiest relationships. This is especially true for avoidants, whose deepest struggles are not always about love itself, but about what intimacy emotionally activates inside them. An avoidant may genuinely care about their partner. They may admire them, feel emotionally connected to them, and even believe they have found the person they truly want. But when old attachment wounds remain unaddressed, the nervous system continues reacting to closeness as if it were a threat. The relationship becomes emotionally confusing because the person feels both love and fear at the same time. Instead of understanding the fear as part of their unresolved emotional conditioning, they may unconsciously blame the relationship for the discomfort they feel. This is why even strong relationships can fall apart when attachment wounds remain hidden beneath the surface. Love may create moments of connection, but unresolved fear quietly influences behavior in destructive ways. The avoidant may pull away after intimacy, become emotionally unavailable during important moments, avoid vulnerability, shut down during conflict, or sabotage closeness when the relationship starts becoming more serious. To the partner, these actions feel contradictory because genuine love seems present, yet emotional consistency is missing. The painful reality is that love cannot replace emotional awareness. A caring partner cannot do the inner healing work on someone else's behalf. No amount of reassurance can permanently calm fears that the avoidant refuses to recognize within themselves. If they do not understand why closeness triggers anxiety, they will continue responding automatically through withdrawal, emotional suppression, or avoidance. They may believe they are protecting themselves, when in reality, they are repeating patterns created long before the relationship began. Many avoidants also mistake emotional discomfort for evidence that something is wrong with the relationship, Instead of recognizing their fear of vulnerability, they focus on flaws, create emotional distance, or convince themselves they need freedom. In doing so, they unintentionally sabotage the very love they were searching for. The relationship becomes another casualty of unresolved emotional pain. Healing attachment wounds requires much more than affection. It requires self-reflection, emotional honesty, accountability, and the willingness to remain emotionally present even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. It means recognizing that intimacy is not danger and learning how to tolerate closeness without immediately escaping from it. The tragedy is that many avoidants lose deeply meaningful relationships not because love was absent, but because fear remains stronger than their ability to stay emotionally open. Until that fear is confronted directly, even real love can become trapped in cycles of distance, confusion, and emotional self-protection.